and welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Duane Carey. The Point is an interview show where we feature one interesting guest for 10 minutes or less. We start with a quick introduction, we end with the guest giving a shout out, and that 7 or 8 minutes in between, that's where they make their point. I'm happy today to welcome Kelly Mitchell. Kelly's the founder and CEO of impactHR in Howard County, Columbia, Maryland. One of the leaders by far in Maryland of HR consultancies, real thought leader and presenter, does a lot of speaking engagements around the state. Kelly, welcome. So glad you're here today.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. I know we've been in touch throughout some of the time with this pandemic, and I know you've been working, it seems like 23 hours a day. It seems like things have been pretty nuts for you.
Yes, very much so.
So speaking of that, why don't we jump right into this? I know we were talking a little bit yesterday that you're seeing a lot of issues with systems and procedures and documentation, and I wanted to ask you, as part of your point, what are some of the big challenges that you're seeing with your clients, and other things that you're just noticing that, gosh, if they would have had this set up in advance, this would have been better, and so forth. What can you tell us about kind of best practices now?
Sure. I think, one of the things that we've seen quite often, especially now, are the lack of communication plans with employees. And I think primarily because, especially with COVID-19, it kind of hit us really fast. Employers didn't really have a chance to really plan for it. And so with all of the changes and the pivoting that employers had to do, the last thing that they really focused on was really communications. And what I mean by communications is really around how are some of those policies going to shift for the employees. And so with everyone being remote right now and working from home, some of those policies that employers have may not be applicable anymore. And so, the issues around, now that they're remote, what are some of those expectations? What are some of those ways that you're going to be starting to keep them productive? What are some of those policies that need to be in place? And I think that is where we've noticed, with this pandemic, that employers did not really prepare for. So they kind of scrambled. And now, we're helping them kind of put some of these policies in place. And then as we move forward, what is that next shift going to be with some of these policies and the communication pieces with the employees?
So you help those employers with communications around that, I'm sure too, right?
Right. And so it's not just the policies, but really the communication, as you said, we're putting those in place. And now that we're kind of getting to the other side of all of this, it's now helping our clients and business owners to think about, now, what is that communication plan as we're now asking people to come back to work, right?
Yeah.
And again, another shift in the policies. We might have had interim policies in place while we were going through this, and everyone's been working from home remotely. Now that we're asking them to come back, what is that shift in that policy again? What are we going to be communicating to them? What is that, that plan, and how we're going to roll out that plan is all tied into how well it's communicated to employees. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the main issues that employers are dealing with regard to getting back to the office or the workplace?
Outside of the physical things, again, I'm just going to focus this around the employees.
Sure.
The biggest issue is really prioritizing and understanding what is that recall strategy going to look like, right, for employers. There's a lot of compliance issues that also need to be addressed when you're going through the plan. But it's dealing with the emotions still with employees, right? You have those that might be taking care of individuals at home that are, have medical conditions. You certainly have those that still have the schools and daycares closed, that, they don't have backup resources, or they themselves have medical conditions and they're fearful or they're anxious about, coming back too soon. So it's really, working with those employees to determine what can we do, who can we bring back. Again, that's the beginning of those strategies that employers should be looking at right now.
So speaking of fear and anxiety, what would an employer do, for example, if an employee just is too worried about this situation and just feels like they can't come back? What kind of policies or I guess regulations and laws more than policies would kick in? What what are the rights of the employee not to come back versus the rights of the employer to say, well, I need somebody in here? What are some of the
Yeah.
guidelines around those kinds of issues?
Sure, sure. So, that is probably the the most asked question of
Okay.
us, is that as they're kind of planning for, and we're helping them kind of prioritize and strategize about what is that recall going to look like for the employers. The most asked question is, well, what happens if an employee says, I'm not ready to come back?
Hmm.
I'm afraid to come back.
Sure.
What can we do as an employer? And it really, again, depends on what the situation is. And I keep going back to communication because I truly believe communication is key, right? Employers should have that dialogue with that employee or those employees to find out what is it that is causing them to be fearful to come back to work. Outside of the protections that do exist for them, right? So, for instance, under the new CARES Act, under the new Expanded Family Medical Leave Act, under any type of disability accommodation, a reasonable accommodation things, if someone is just afraid to come to work, there really is no protection for that employee per se.
Okay.
But but I do think that it's important for the employer to have a dialogue with that employee. Maybe they're concerned about the fact that we're in an office building that they don't know how it's being cleaned right now. So the employer then needs to say, okay, let's figure out what is the safety protocol in our office. What can we do to kind of eliminate some of these concerns and these fears? So it goes back to, again, communication, right? That having that dialogue.
Okay. Great. Just have to ask real quick. We only have a couple minutes, and I promise to the audience this is not a commercial for Impact HR, but it strikes me. Do you and your many consultants sit down with the employer and the employee to kind of facilitate that discussion at all? Because if it's me and we're talking about ADA stuff, I'm scared to death and I don't want to have that conversation. So do you
Hmm.
ever sit with the parties and help facilitate that?
We
Okay.
do, and we do a lot of coaching for the employers and the managers, and train the managers as well. But yes, to answer your question, we do a lot of that, kind of the HR representation in some of those meetings, and ensuring that the employer's not crossing into, something that could cause risk or exposure for them, and making
Okay.
sure that the conversation's on track.
Sure.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, this was really great. We're actually at the end of our time. Can I get you to give your shout out?
Sure. I do want to, I guess, shout out to all of those employers, especially during this time, that have had to pivot, how they do their business, what they're doing with their business, but more importantly, doing all the right things for their employees. And I think that's a true testament the type of employers they want to be. So a big shout out to them. And as we're coming across, on the other side of this, things are going to be different, continue to be different for all of us. And so another shout out for all the employees that are continually trying to do all the right things, you know, for and by their people. So that's my
That's
shout
awesome.
out.
You often hear that, character is revealed when people are under stress. And I think that's the point where, you know, as you know, with what I do, I do so much advocating for business owners, business people. And I always say that, there's no bigger heroes out there than the people who take these great risks and employ people. And I think we've seen a lot of great responses to this massive stress
Right,
among the
right.
employers and the employees. You're right. We've been tested. We've been tested big time so far, and hopefully that test won't last much longer.
I
Kelly
agree.
Mitchell, Impact HR. Always a pleasure, my friend. Great to see you. Thanks.
Yeah, same here.
Thanks for imparting your wisdom to all the business people in Maryland.
Great. Well, thank you. I truly enjoyed this.
Thank you.